Good morning and welcome to our webinar on LHF, the basics. My name's Lade. I am the Events and Training Lead at the ASA, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues today and two guests from Clearcast. I'll allow my colleagues to introduce themselves first, starting with James.
Good morning, I'm James Craig and I'm the head of casework at the Advertising Standards Authority.
Good morning, Andy Taylor. I'm Senior Regulatory Policy Executive at the Committees of Advertising Practice.
Morning, my name is Pete Bellis and I'm the Copy Development Manager at Clearcast.
Hi, I'm Kathy Leyland and I'm a Copy Group Manager at Clearcast, working with advertisers and agencies.
Perfect, thank you everyone. Right, so I'm just going to quickly go through what we're going to be covering today before I hand over to the speakers. So we'll basically be covering what the new LHF rules say, what the ASA and CAP's role is, what advertisers need to consider, Clearcast's perspective, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. Just for a bit of housekeeping, so the session is being recorded and you will be sent a link to recording after the session, and it will be uploaded onto the ASA website as well. You'll also receive a link to resources that should be helpful to you. If you do have any questions in the Q&A for the Q&A section, please do pop them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them. Usually we do try to get as many people involved as possible. Just due to time, we'll only be able to read questions out, so we won't be able to answer questions from people who raise their hands, just because we have quite a few questions to get through already, but it's just something for you to be aware of. Okay, I'm going to pass on to our first speaker of the day, who will be James.
Thanks, Lade. So the ASA is the UK's independent advertising regulator. We apply the CAP and BCAP codes across all media, ensuring ads are legal, decent, honest and truthful. We do this through a combination of reactive complaint handling and proactive regulation, all aimed at delivering fair competition and protecting consumers. We've been appointed by Ofcom, the statutory body responsible, to be the frontline regulator enforcing the restrictions. Unlike other areas of the code, the ASA owns the implementation guidance. We delegated development and the consultation process to the Committees of Advertising Practice, given their experience in developing support materials to assist advertisers in complying with the codes. Today, I want to focus on how, in practice, we expect to handle concerns about advertising for less healthy foods under the new rules, which take force from the 5th of January. First, a reminder of the essential public health context. Government wants to reduce further children's exposure to ads for food and drink high in fat, salt, or sugar. It's doing this to help tackle the childhood obesity crisis in the UK and support the government's ambition to raise the healthiest generation of children ever. This is the spirit in which we ask you to apply the rules. Ultimately, the ASA's frontline regulation always comes down to the letter of the rules and associated guidance, but we ask you not to lose sight of the public health spirit in which the rules are framed. The new rules have applied from the 5th of January 2026, and they represent a major shift in how the UK regulates less healthy food and drink advertising. The rules will prohibit advertising for identifiable less healthy products on Ofcom licensed television channels from 5:30 a.m. to 9 p.m, on Ofcom regulated on-demand programme services from 5:30 a.m. to 9 p.m, and online at any time if someone has paid for the advertisement to be placed and it is intended to be accessed principally by UK users. These new rules sit alongside the long-standing rules on HFSS ads, which apply scheduling and placement restrictions in children's media and content restrictions in general audience media. When it comes to less healthy food advertising, we expect complaints to come from a variety of sources. Members of the public who believe an ad is showing or implying a specific less healthy product in a restricted medium, competitors who are often highly familiar with the rules and quick to spot potential breaches, and civil society organisations and campaign groups who monitor HFSS issues closely. While complaints may arrive in large numbers or in very small numbers, what matters is not the volume of complaints but their substance. A single well-founded complaint is enough for us to investigate. So our process is structured and evidence-based. We start with an initial assessment. Complaints are reviewed by our complaints team to determine whether the issues raised fall under the CAP or BCAP codes and whether an investigation is warranted. If the concerns appear valid, we open a case and contact the advertiser, setting out the issues that need responding to. Our investigations team then considers the advertiser's evidence, explanations, and justification for compliance with the rules. The ASA Council then makes the final decision. The ruling is published, establishing precedent and providing clarity for the whole industry. Throughout this process, the quality and relevance of the advertiser's evidence matters a great deal. So the ASA reverses the burden of proof, which means that we ask advertisers to tell us why their ad is compliant with the rule we bring to their attention. We do this for clear reasons. First, the advertisers have an obligation to ensure their ads comply with the rules before publication. Advertisers are the ones who create, fund, and disseminate their advertising. It is therefore reasonable that they can best explain its content, and from their perspective, the ad's likely impact on the audience. Consumers and complainants are unlikely to have access to all the relevant internal information. Advertisers, by contrast, generally do. Reversing the burden simply means if we raise a concern, the advertiser must demonstrate why their ad complies. Where we reverse the burden of proof under the less healthy food rules, we expect advertisers to have primary regard to the rules and the guidance which reflect the underlying law. To explain clearly and as relevant why an ad is not in the scope of the restrictions and why it is not likely to be seen by the average consumer as promoting a specific, identifiable, less healthy product. We expect advertisers to be able to point to specific elements of their creative, supported by their application of the rules and guidance, to explain why their ad complies. Our hope and our expectation is that the rules and the guidance will give advertisers the tools they need to develop creative, effective, and compliant campaigns. But inevitably, some ads will fall outside the boundaries. When that happens and the ASA rules on them, those rulings will clarify how we interpret key concepts, potentially illustrate the difference between compliant brand advertising and in-scope ads for specific identifiable products, and provide the market with practical examples of what does and does not constitute a breach. This iterative process is always intended to get us to a place of greatest clarity, where our regulation is more predictable and your creative decision-making is therefore more self-assured. Reactively tackling complaints is only one part of our role. We also consider ads proactively, including through our active ad monitoring system, which uses technology to identify potentially non-compliant advertising at scale. In the early days of the new less healthy food rules, we intend to use active ad monitoring in a limited, targeted, and proportionate way. We will focus its use on ads that appear on their face to present clear breaches of the rules. Even in these cases, we will provide advertisers with an opportunity to defend why their ads comply with the codes. I'm now going to hand over to Andy.
Thanks, James. If we could go to the next slide, please, Lade. Good morning. Just a brief overview of who the Committee of Advertising Practice are after you've heard from the ASA. We are the in advertising self-regulation, in essence, the part of the organisation that is there to deal with matters from an industry-facing perspective, industry's role in authoring the UK advertising codes, setting standards to bind industry, various stakeholders and practitioners to those standards, and also for carrying out processes such as the ones that you've just seen in relation to less healthy foods, developing rules and guidance with the benefit of public consultation to seek buy-in and scrutiny to ensure, as in this instance, that we got the rules and guidance to be as closely aligned as is possible with the underlying legislation so that the ASA can put them into effect. Another key job that we do, which we are doing at this very moment in time with you guys, is advising practitioners on compliance. And this is something which I'll return to at various points in this presentation and the questions at the end. We're here to help you comply. If there's complexity, if there's uncertainty, CAP is your go-to point to help you. If we could go to the first slide, please, Lado. I'm going to give you a sort of a very quick overview of the way the restrictions work and how perhaps to approach one of the ways that you can approach the guidance. There's a lot of moving parts to the restrictions, and that can be slightly daunting, but if you sort of flip that on its head, those moving parts, those sort of different criteria, different exemptions, different tests, etc., give you lots of options in terms of how you ensure that your ad, lots of different routes to make sure that your ad is compliant, to stop it from falling within scope and being restricted. So this just gives a very brief overview of sort of the main criteria that would result most of the time in an ad being restricted. So the ad must be for an identifiable LHF product. It must also depict a specific LHF product. It's got to be in one of the restricted media, TV, ODPS before 9 p.m. or paid online. And the advertising party has to be outside the scope of the SME exemption, so a non-SME. Next slide, please. What I want to focus in on is the interaction between the identifiability test, which is the overarching sort of potential for a piece of content to be within scope, and where that locks into the exemptions. You'll notice in the guidance, we refer to this as being the primary test. We do that because it is the main one set out in primary legislation. But I think it's important just to understand the real sort of crib within this is just to try to get how this locks into the exemptions, and the way in which we've structured the guidance speaks to that. So the identifiability test is where persons in the UK could reasonably be expected to identify an ad as being for that or those products, that product or those products. Effectively, would someone, an average consumer, a notional person, this common test you find in consumer protection law, what would they say an ad is for? This is quite a broad test in the sense that it's not asking what's in the ad. It's not saying, can you identify anything when you look at the ad with your magnifying glass? It's simply saying, what would the reasonable person, he or she, what would they expect in terms of the output, the takeout of the ad in terms of what they would consider it to be for. And because it's structured around this idea of product or products, singular or plural, it could be that someone sees an ad very obviously for a product, the product that's in the ad, or alternatively, it might be that a piece of branding that relates to products leads people to believe that that ad identifies those products. It's a complex assessment because there's a lot of factors in there. We're trying to apply this sort of common legal principle of the notional person test, and the ASA would have to consider all sorts of different things to conclude whether an ad meets the identifiability test. But here's the really important point. The identifiability test is sort of the potential for scope based on the content of an ad. It's the potential for things which are in. It is not basically the thing, the denominator which decides what is banned or not. Why? And if we move to the next slide, please. Because it's subject to a whole range of exemptions. And this is really important. The guidance is sort of structured to set out the identifiability test, but we have obviously gone into some detail on that, but then tried to focus in readers of the guidance and users on the exemptions. The point is, if you meet identifiability, you can still ensure that your ad is compliant by meeting one of the various exemptions, one of the various routes to compliance. You can advertise in an identifiable way a product that is out of scope. So therefore you're identifying something that isn't a less healthy product, and therefore the ad's out. The ad is out of the restrictions. You can also, by your very nature as a business, be an SME. Therefore, whatever you do doesn't fall within scope of the LHF restrictions, although the HFSS restrictions will still apply. You can also put your ad into a whole range of media which are not covered by the restriction. It applies only to the 3 listed media, ODPS and television before 9 p.m. You can obviously advertise after 9 p.m. And paid online. You can still advertise online, provided that there is no payment involved. And I think what is the most important of the exemptions for quite a lot of brands is this idea of a brand advertising exemption. And if we could go to the next slide, please, Lade. And this is what I want to focus in on. It's the big development in the policy. Obviously, there is a long-running saga of how this exercise evolved over several consultative exercises. But ultimately, last year, a significant intervention by government to clarify that the legislative restriction should not be applied to brand advertising. This was done through a set of regulations introduced at the back end of last year. And this just basically essentializes and gets down to what they want to restrict through the legislation, which is the specific product depictions, specific allusions to actual LHF products that influence children's diets. So ultimately, the brand exemption, it gives scope for companies, for master brands, even down to ranges of products and so forth. These can all be promoted, provided there is not a depiction, and this is another test now set out in law, depiction of a specific less healthy product. So ultimately, you can meet the identifiability test. You are potentially within scope with the ad that you've produced. However, because you have not depicted a specific less healthy product, you are out. And there are some examples here, just basically showing the different levels that this works on. Obviously, an image of a product in pack, that is very obviously a depiction of a product. And if you put a less healthy product in pack in the ad, that's a depiction of the product. If you don't, that likely wouldn't be. But it also extends as well to things like the use of generic product imagery and whether that piece of generic imagery points to a specific product. The legislation has quite a broad approach to how it defines depicting a specific product. So if you had branding techniques like a flavor, a logo or something, which if you sort of put them together, they equate to just one of the products in a particular range, a particular flavor, for example, that likely could be an issue. The key, though, is as long as you're advertising the sort of the level above sorry, I shouldn't use that word, above the level of showing or depicting one specific product, you should be in clear water. If we could move to the next slide, please. I just want to sort of expand on the guidance focuses on various of the exemptions, and I just want to sort of give some sort of talk through general examples of what we've described here as safe zones, things that you can do under the various criteria within the guidance, the main section. So firstly, looking at things from the perspective of products, obviously there are products that are in scope and out of scope. The products in scope are determined by the fact that they meet the existing HFSS nutrient profiling model. So those of you who are familiar or have been for this nearly 20 years now with the HFSS restrictions, if it meets the test, the nutrient profiling model for those restrictions, and it is also on a set of a list of product categories of product classifications, which are set out in a piece of secondary legislation from 2024. It is an LHF product. If it doesn't, i.e. if it isn't HFSS or it isn't within the categories in government's legislation, then it's not LHF. So in which case you can promote away a direct product promotion for that kind of product, and you are identifying a non-LHF product. It's not within scope. It's just, it might sound very blatantly obvious, but I think it is important to point out that that kind of approach, you're pretty much on safe ground, because the focus, what people are going to think you're selling to them, is the non-LHF product, which is not something that is restricted. Getting slightly more into the detail, if you have a brand of products, a brand for a range of products which are mostly LHF or are associated strongly with LHF, but you have a few non-LHF variants of that, obviously under the brand exemption, provided you don't show, so provided you don't depict a specific LHF product, you can advertise that brand. You obviously, as you're selling food products, you want to be able to show something that you sell. So using a non-LHF product as the sort of the example from a range, that's a very useful way. You can basically use it in the role of a generic image. Effectively, you're showing a piece of product imagery that that depicts or is intended to illustrate the range of products. And if that's a non-LHF product, you're highly unlikely to be depicting a specific less healthy product. So therefore, that would be acceptable, irrespective of the nature of the range. Another, just sort of slightly expanding on that, you can use non-LHF products in, as I think I said there, just in the role of generic imagery. So if you wanted something that's a bit more abstract rather than pointing to a specific product, you could use a non-LHF product, provided it is suitably different to any LHF variant. So it is visually distinguishable rather than being visually indistinguishable, because under the brand exemption, you're not allowed to put something in an ad which looks exactly the same as an LHF product, although the information is not necessarily there for someone viewing the ad to be able to identify it. If we can move to the next slide, please. Another option, approaching this from quite a different perspective, is just the media. It's worth sort of making clear, again, that the LHF restrictions only apply to the 3 covered media, so that gives options, and just a few here: radio and outdoor are options. They are covered by the existing HFSS framework and are not affected. You then also have this, I think, important division, particularly when you're using your socials, your own social accounts, your own social pages, etc. If it's organic content, it's out. You can also use your own websites and apps. For instance, things like push notifications from your own app to somebody, provided there's no payment involved. Basically, those are not within scope. The key here is this presence of payment. So if you have spaces online where you're not paying, where you're basically just using your own space, your own reach to get the message across, that's something that's likely to be outside of scope and simply subject to the HFSS rules. Next slide, please. And on brand advertising, and the probably most straightforward way of staying safe, remember, you can't depict a specific less healthy product. So just using sort of simple logo-based brand awareness, companies, master brands, ranges, the only danger zone is if you use a logo that relates to a specific product. But if there's no product imagery in an ad, and the logo relates to lots of products or to a company or to a wider identity, then it is virtually impossible for you to be caught depicting a specific less healthy product. But obviously the ASA would have to assess the particulars, because you have to be careful of the wider ad creative and the message that can be put across from that. As noted before, using generic imagery, that's another very useful means of conveying the sort of characteristics, the feel of a product to those viewing the ad. So you could show product ingredients in their unprocessed state, products being created, made, etc. The key is that you don't go so far as to create a combination of factors within an ad which points to a specific product. So if you threw in something which is representative of a flavour, for example, then possibly going too far. But just simply having your basics of preparation or ingredient, that's likely to be an acceptable approach. Also, going back to the previous suggestion, using, and just to stress it again, using non-LHF variant imagery is a really good way, provided that it's just suitably denoted within the ad so no one can confuse it for something else. That's a really useful way of ensuring that you can get the message across about what your products in general look like within a range, even if that's mostly LHF. But the key thing is you're not depicting a specific less healthy product. And finally, just sort of sort of taken a step back from more product related promotion. Things like CSR, where there isn't really a product focus, it's just a brand talking about one of their worthy activities and things that they're doing in society and so forth. And that kind of thing is likely to be acceptable because it doesn't really relate specifically to products. But obviously there is the risk when you get slightly closer to the product, to your product portfolio in some way in terms of ingredients or something like that. You might fall in a risk zone if there were a combination of things which pointed to a specific product. But obviously I think CSR is quite a lot harder to envisage being a problem. And the next slide, please. I think the final one. And this is just sort of flips it back over again just to where the danger zones are. And I think a lot of this is self-evident. If you show a specific product in its pack and its LHF, you're going to be very, very close to the wind, I think. But at the same time, just remember that things like imagery or characters that are representative of a specific product, or uniquely representative of that product, again, there's the risk. And that extends as well to slightly more abstract brand techniques, so things like colors, logos, and themes. The key is, as long as you're not pointing to one specific product, you're likely to be okay. Just as well to think also about just some of the complexities, such as in relation to influencers. And if you're paying for an influencer to post content, that is in scope. It is paying for an ad to be placed. Whatever the influencer posts is potentially within scope and a problem. Also, at the same time, things like product listings and placements on delivery platforms, also retailers, etc. In their natural state, delivery platform listings, retail product listings, they are the delivery site, the retailer's own advertising. But there are obviously lots of relationships that go on between suppliers and retailers, restaurants and delivery platforms. And it's just important to note that there is a division between stuff that is purely the responsibility of the media platform owner, so therefore it's their own ad, they are outside of scope, and also and things which they might put up in terms of content that has been paid for or incentivized because of a relationship with a supplier or a restaurant and so forth. It's important to ensure that in those circumstances, anything that is paid for, boosted, sponsored, endorsed, and all that kind of thing, that it complies with the guidance. And with that, thank you very much. I think we're handing over to Clearcast.
Thank you. Cheers, Andy. Morning all. My name is Pete from Clearcast, and I provide the copy development service. I'll briefly talk you through kind of who we are as a body and what we've been doing over the last 3 months and what we've discovered in relation to some of the work we've been putting through on LHF, and also how we can help you, agencies, advertisers, brands, to moving forward into 2026. Next slide, please, Lado. So Clearcast as a whole, our shareholders known as Sky, ITV, Channel 4, broadcasters in the UK, and our central and core service that we provide pre-checks and pre-approves television and video on demand adverts for all commercial broadcasters, ensuring they comply with the UK advertising codes before they go to air, so covering rules against areas such as misleading, harmful, offensive content, and also potentially restricting certain types of adverts in line with the code rules before they go on air. So by doing this, it provides an extra level of trust and protection that benefits not only the public, the broadcasters, but also benefits the brands like yourselves to help protect your reputation of the creators, the agencies, and to ensure that your ad isn't being upheld or taken off air. It's an extra layer of protection there for you. We do this by working with agencies and advertisers through various services such as copy development, training, but also the main 3-stage clearance process, where we work with agencies and advertisers across scripts, looking at evidence in detail, lots of in-depth discussions on claims, creative ideas, and through the process such as the edits and obviously the final ad to help you get that on air. And essentially our goal is to help you stay on air. So over the last 3 months, we've been working with industry bodies and the broadcasters. So next slide, please. Lado. So we've been working with the industry bodies and the broadcasters for, well, a long time now, through most of 2025. But obviously, there was the government interim agreement. So from the 1st of October last year, the LHF restrictions have been live and in place from on TV and online. So we've been working with industry bodies and our broadcaster shareholders for many months, quite meticulously, to ensure that during the sort of 3-month period that everything's been discussed and cautiously approached in line with the government legislation that was put into effect last year. The copy team, including myself, been working closely and carefully with brands as well in Q4 of last year, especially with the Christmas campaigns, to look at the LHF rules, and also moving forward into the new year in 2026, we can help continue to provide that level of service and that level of detailed discussion to help you get your ads cleared and on air. So hopefully there'll be a smooth transition for you all. So we've been looking at the legislation, the government guidance in this period to help guide us until the new CAP rules that came into effect earlier this month. In these last few months, we've sort of picked out some areas of discussion and careful sort of points to consider on your side and ours that we think, might help you get your head around LHF and also consider when planning your campaigns and submitting to Clearcast. That some areas are a little bit more complex and require a little bit more conversation and examination by Clearcast. So, we're here to help you and work with you. So one of the main areas that we've seen is this idea that LHF and exist as well as HFSS. So HFSS still exists. The rules still exist, as Andy said before, but LHF is a new set of guidance, new set of rules that come into play. So, Clearcast offering lots of helpful tools online on this matter. We've got a blog online, as sort of referenced here. And it's important to reiterate that LHF is not replacing HFSS. The two coexist. So HFSS rules still exist. So HFSS traditionally is a scheduling restriction put on a TV ad where you can't air in and around the program ad breaks of programs with an audience data aimed at under 16s. Whereas the less healthy food restriction that's come into effect, it's been in effect since 1st of October, is a timing restriction. And that means your ad cannot air before 9 o'clock. So, for example, we found that there might be certain instances where your advert is not restricted by LHF. For example, like Andy touched on these previous slides, there's lots of exemptions, such as you might be an SME. Even if that's the case, your advert will still be reviewed by Clearcast under the existing HFSS rules. So we will look at the substantiation to decide whether, even though it's not restricted post-9 LHF, it might need the HFSS scheduling restriction still. So that is a common conversation that still might come up with agencies and advertisers. So just to be clear, when we're talking about HFSS restrictions, it's not the same as the LHF restriction. Just want to make that clear, not to scare anyone. We've got this helpful blog that my colleague Kathy has published on our website, and there's lots of helpful tools on our website as well. Next slide, please, Lado. To help you sort of move through this period and, when you're planning your campaigns, your decks, your scripts, what are certain things to watch out for on your side and things that we can help with. So we kind of we looked at areas where that kept coming up, which could be slightly more complex and require more attention with us. So some of the watch out areas that we've found over the last few months when working with brands and agencies, areas such as co-promotions. Are you a brand such as a charity, but you're doing a co-promotion with a supermarket or a brand that offers food and drink items? These are areas to watch out for, because you could potentially find yourself, depending on your creative and what you feature in your advert, could you be restricted, for example? Other areas that we found have required close sort of inspection is holiday companies, hotel companies, cruise ships, and general travel ads, because it's those kind of brands and areas of the advertising industry that you think you don't immediately associate with food and drink, but of course they still sell food and drink, through restaurants, takeaway menus, items. So again, it's being cautious and being careful about that, and telling Clearcast as much information, what's going to be in your creative. Are you going to feature items? Are you going to talk about that in your voiceover or the dialogue? Are you going to, it depends on how kind of prominent you kind of want to highlight these areas of your business. And if, the more prominent and the more kind of spotlight you shine on, showing a particular menu item, the more likely, you will need to be assessed under the LHF restrictions. And again, brand adverts, as Andy touched upon, that is an exemption. But again, need to be careful because, we know how clever creatives can be. And, through stories, designs, themes, characters, you can still potentially, if you're identifying a specific LHF product, you could be caught. So little watch outs like that, and I've been working with clients over the last sort of 6 months or so, and the easiest wins that I've been telling them is to highlight your non-HFSS products and clearly identify them. It's one thing putting a low fat version of your product in the ad, but make sure it is clearly identifiable from the full fat version, for example. Make sure the branding, is it called out in the voiceover, just so it's clearly an ad identifying the non-HFSS version. Also, brands we've noticed have been reformulating as well, which is good. That's in line with what the government intended with this whole set of rules. So, please tell us if you've got a product that perhaps used to be HFSS, but you've reformulated, tell Clearcast as early as possible. You've got the nutrient profile model form that you can fill in that provides the scoring system to decide whether a product is HFSS or non-HFSS. So that's heavily important. Or picking products from a range that perhaps don't fall within one of the 13 government categories. There's lots of areas there. Next slide, please, Lado. Which leads me to ways which Clearcast help. We want to work with brands and agencies to help you, make sure your ads are compliant, and so Clearcast, got a variety of ways. We've got lots of helpful tools online, such as we crafted like a script storyboard template. And I think that's really important to provide us with as much information as possible on there as early as possible. Because it's TV, we have to look at the visual content as well as the audio and the dialogue content, and as well as the content on screen as well in your messaging, graphics on screen, supers, things like that, to give us as much information as possible, including details on what products are featured. Give us a breakdown as early as possible, list out those products in that sort of script or storyboard. And, and if you can tell us as early as possible, is it a HFSS product? Is it an out of scope? A lot of the kind of onus is going to be on the advertiser to, do their research on the types of products they want to advertise and tell us. It will help our discussions, and it will also speed up, the way we can kind of help you and, get your ad to air. We also have an SME exemption declaration form on our website, like a template form, which you can download and you can submit that as part of the substantiation. If you're a small brand and you want to advertise on TV, you submit your script in. If you can provide that form from the get-go, that will help us, see that you're immediately exempt. And also the nutrient profile model scoring form. It's the same as it was before. It's the existing form, but just a reminder, it's there on our website, for the brands to complete about, each flavor variant or each variant or all the products involved and that are featured in your ad. We need that form as part of our kind of discussion process and review process in terms of substantiation. So there's lots of helpful tools there. Like I say, there's the helpful blogs as well. And like I say, we've got the copy development service, which I provide, which can work with brands at an earlier stage to go through your deck ideas, your potential claim ideas, or, is this product going to be compliant or not? You can talk to us as early as you want. And, we're also offering a training session as well that's coming up in March, which you can book now. I think the date's on screen. That's provided by my colleague Michael, and that's again out to agencies, industry, to give you another perspective of how we can help you, how you can navigate less healthy restrictions, and help you get your ads on air essentially. So that's it from me. I'll pass back to you, Lade.
Hi, James. I can cover this bit as well. Thank you for everyone who's spoken. In terms of resources that are available, so we strongly advise advertisers and agencies seek pre-publication advice. So Clearcast for all broadcast TV advertising and the CAP copy advice team for non-broadcast and online advertising. So both services are experienced, confidential, and accustomed to working with the complexities of food and soft drink advertising regulation. So taking advice before going live with your ad really delivers real and measurable benefits. It reduces the risk of breaches, avoiding the cost and disruption of having to withdraw or amend campaigns, and it provides a regulatory safety check, ensuring that your own internal interpretation aligns with how the ASA is likely to apply the rules. It creates an audit trail, demonstrate they've acted responsibly and took all reasonable steps prior to publication, notwithstanding that the ASA Council is the final arbitrator of the code. And ultimately, it supports creative freedom because knowing the boundaries allows teams to innovate confidently within them. So in addition to the rules and guidance, CAP's copy advice team also has produced secondary advice resources, which I'll be sharing with you afterwards. I'm just conscious of time, and I'm just all the questions that I've gone through. So we're just going to skip straight to the Q&A section. So please bear with me. Like I said, there's quite a few questions that have come through. So I'm just going to try and consolidate them and whiz through. And I know some of you pre-submitted questions as well. So I'll be going back and forth. Just starting with the first question. So someone's asked, what action is taken against businesses that do not comply, especially when compliant businesses feel disadvantaged? Don't know if that's one for the ASA to take on.
Sorry, Lade, could you just repeat that question? It didn't come through to me.
Yeah, sure. What action is taken against businesses that do not comply, especially when compliant businesses feel disadvantaged?
Yeah, so in that it would just be our normal range of enforcement action, which could include rulings. It could include informal resolutions. So just the full range of the ASA's normal enforcement action, and ultimately sanctions such as compliance action if non-compliance persists.
Okay, thank you. Another question that's been asked, what further toolkits will be published to help advertisers comply and when? Clearcast, I don't know if you want to expand on that, or Andy as well.
Yeah, I can answer this bit from the Clearcast perspective. I think Pete talked quite a bit about it in his presentation, but we'd initially ask you to have a look at the ASA website, the CAP guidance. There's FAQs on there as well. But like Pete said, we offer template forms to help advertisers and agencies structure scripts. We've got blogs, information. Please come to your Clearcast contact or speak to me and Pete if you're not sure who that is. And we're very happy to give agencies and advertisers advice. Submit scripts as soon as you possibly can. We've got the training webinar coming up on the 4th of March. So we're here and ready to give advice and offer resources where you need them.
Thank you. And someone did ask if I can link through to that blog that Pete featured, so I can definitely add that onto the follow-on email just for the person who asked that question. Moving on, is advertising through apps in scope of the restrictions? Angie, I don't know if that's one that you want to take on.
Yes, well, it depends. It's going to be the online restriction, and that comes down to the question whether the ad is paid for. So if it's your own app, then your communications, which are purely your communications on that app, are highly unlikely to be within scope. But where you have other parties involved, suppliers, or maybe if you're a delivery platform, restaurants, etc., if they are paying for an ad to be placed, as in the wording of the guidance, there is a significant possibility of it being within scope. So it depends on this sort of crux of where the payment is at play.
Thank you. Someone else has asked, is there a copy, this is for Clearcast, is there a copy of the Clearcast NPF scoring document? Currently they're using an in-house one, but it'd be good to see a Clearcast version.
Yes, definitely. That's available on our website. Again, speak to me and Pete or your Clearcast contact if you're not quite sure where that is. But there's a forms section on the Clearcast website. If you just type in forms, it will take you to all of our forms, and the LHF and HFSS related forms are all on there.
Yeah, it should be under the help desk tab at the top of our website.
Perfect. Thank you. Next one. Do brands for companies that make LHF foods need to comply with the HFSS rules, e.g., the 75% of audiences over 16, making sure that it's less than? I think you might have touched on this already, Pete and Andy, but just for further clarification.
Yes, the LHF restrictions will apply as the first sort of level, the first tier. I think we've described it in the consultation materials. If you're not covered by those, and if you're a brand that's doing things across lots of media before and after 9 p.m. on TV and ODPS, for example, you're going to be within different frameworks for a given ad. I think Clearcast gave a good explanation of their approach to this.
We'd also, sorry, Pete, we'd also caution using AI for this. I think if you use AI searches and things, they see, it seems to think that LHF is the same as HFSS at the moment. It hasn't quite learned the difference. So that's why we did a blog about explaining the difference, and make sure that you know the difference between LHF and HFSS, because it can get a bit confusing. And again, if you don't speak to us.
Yeah, it would depend on the creative that you submit to us, case by case, really, and what's being shown.
Thank you. Next one. Can advertisers respond to consumer search results with a brand advert that shows no identifiable LHF product? So, for example, after a user searches confectionery.
I can answer this one, Lade. I think it's quite straightforward. We'd look at whether the ad was a restricted ad. So if the brand ad, if the brand advertising exemption applied because it didn't show an identifiable product, it would be outside the scope of the restrictions.
Okay, thank you. One for Clearcast. If an HFSS compliant product is shown, would adding a disclaimer or label identifying the specific product be sufficient to prevent association with the less healthy variant?
We don't think you would always need a disclaimer, really. If it is clear which product you're showing, I think Andy touched on it earlier. If you make it clear which product you're showing, if there's any kind of confusion, if say it looks like a product that is not, is an LHF product, and HFSS, then we'd ask you to make it clear in the ad which product you're actually advertising, or as people have said, advertise the non-HFSS LHF product.
Yeah, I mean, if the packaging is similar, just be mindful about that, and just, if you can make it clear in the voiceover or logos on screen that this is the, say, 0 sugar variant, that will certainly help.
Thank you. We've had quite a few questions about influencers, so I'm just gonna jump in with that. So, what is permitted and not permitted regarding influencers and brand ambassadors under the LHF rules? Can brands give products to influencers if there's no contractual requirement to post?
The position on influencers is basically that they will be treated pretty much as any other paid online ad medium. Effectively, the basic relationship is that some sort of consideration, payment, or affiliate reciprocal relationship is involved. So therefore, the content produced by the influencer would be within scope. It doesn't ban influencers. It simply says that you have to comply with the guidance. So the brand exemption is the obvious point. Actually having things like specific less healthy products depicted is going to be a significant risk. I think one of the questions we are getting a lot is around this idea of gifting. It's important to note that payment as a concept within the legislation has an incredibly broad definition. So it's any consideration. So a gift is very likely, as we say in the guidance, to constitute payment. The ASA's approach to that will be that it will have to assess the full circumstances of what has occurred, what the relationship is between the advertiser and the influencer, the existence of any agreements, the nature of the content that's been produced and where it's placed. One option which we think is likely to be acceptable is this notion of paying for content to be created, but then the advertiser who has paid placing that content only on their own social media site. So effectively, they haven't paid for an ad to be placed, they have paid for content to be created that is an ad, and then they themselves have placed it. So that is likely to be acceptable. But I think that there is risk in terms of gifting, or even without obligation, and in the expectation that content will be produced featuring that gift. We're going to need to wait for the ASA to make some rulings on specific cases before we have a bit more clarity on that point, but we would hopefully see that later in the year.
Thank you. What is the position on food branded characters and whether claiming we don't market to kids is credible if the brand includes a character? What are the thoughts on that?
The legislation specifically includes characters as part of its definition of how you can depict a product. This, what I'm about to say, relates to quite a lot of things in relation to the brand exemption. Obviously, identifiability, that's broad. So if you meet that test, there's a potential for you to be within scope. If you want to stay out of scope by using the brand exemption to get out, you have to avoid depiction. If you have a character or virtually any other sort of branding device, piece of imagery, etc., that relates to multiple products that is used. So, for example, if you had a license, it's not a licensed character, sorry. Well, if you actually, I think, a licensed character that you use to sell a range of products, or an equity character that relates to your business and so forth, that device, that technique of using that character or licensed character or whatever, that doesn't point to one product. It points to multiple, or it points to a company that sells all sorts of things. The danger zone is where you have a character that is used uniquely to sell one product. If that's the case, then it's likely that you're going to be depicting that specific product, and therefore you would not qualify for the brand exemption.
Thank you. If a non-LHF product is being shown, if a non-LHF product is shown being used to make a finished dish, like an LHF dish, so for example, rice using biryani, does this trigger LHF restrictions? I think this is for like if you're creating recipes or you're showing recipe content. I think it's about that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's just from the example there that was given in the question, which is not vague but quite sort of top level. It's unlikely that would be an issue. The key is the product is LHF. To be LHF, it has to be something which is capable of being purchased, so it can therefore be nutrient profiled. To be H for CES and fit into the categories. So basically, one of the prerequisites is that the LHF product is an actual product that you can buy. So if a manufacturer of non-LHF ingredients had an ad with lots of things that are LHF around it, just sort of generic depictions of a component for a recipe, etc., that's likely to be fine. However, the problem would be if you were, say, a supermarket where you also sold all of those other things. There might be questions in compliance terms, but in its simple sense, if you're a manufacturer who is selling a non-LHF product and you depict it because it's inherently used with LHF products sourced from somewhere else, that's likely to be acceptable. Also, the lovely enigmatic shot of the outcome of the recipe, the final finished item, if that inherently really can't be purchased because it's something that you're encouraging people to make themselves. You can't go and buy that product, so that wouldn't be something that's caught. But I think the key thing is just to is to realise that there's quite a lot of scope for non-LHF products to be depicted alongside LHF products that are generically represented. So that's a wrong way of putting it. Alongside things which look like LHF products, but you have to be careful if you are a provider of those products as well, as even though you're focusing on the non-LHF, the presence of the others could be seen to point to specific LHF products.
Thank you. I've got a question for a Clearcast here. Someone's asked if the food shown is clearly healthy. So, for example, salads, sushi, or raw ingredients, does it still require a nutritional profile certificate?
If it's a product that's in one of the categories, one of the government LHF categories, we would still ask for a nutritional profile certificate. Just so that we can be clear, unless it's something like a banana, an apple, something that is, something that is absolutely not in kind of a category at all and something very obvious. But if it is in one of the LHF categories, we would ask just so that we have evidence, if the ASA ask us, really.
Thank you. Other question. Someone's asked if sampling is not allowed for influencers, can brands use coupons for the general public to purchase LHF products?
As long as the ad content, etc., doesn't feature so it doesn't depict a specific less healthy product, that would tend to point to something being okay. So if you're promoting coupons or showing someone using a coupon, etc., that's fine because it's not an LHF product. The issue, however, would be if the content also included, even incidentally, specific LHF products. So if someone's buying something with a coupon and you can sort of see the specific LHF product in reasonable prominence, I think there'd be questions there. As I said, it's a tricky area, but that kind of it comes back to sort of your basics, that if you're going to put a specific product in an ad at any level of prominence, there's going to be risk there.
Okay. James, I've got a question for you. Someone's asked, is the ASA now proactively monitoring for non-compliance now that the laws officially come into play?
Well, as we noted earlier, we're using the active and monitoring in a limited and proportionate way. So it's early days now, and yeah, there's not much more we can say about that at the moment.
Okay. I'm just conscious of time. I know that quite a few questions have come through, but don't worry, we will get back to people who have put their name down. But just to kind of go through some of the ones that have been asked quite persistently. Someone has asked, what is the position on PPC and Google shopping ads for LHF products?
Pay-per-click, basically, if there's payment involved, it's highly likely to be within scope.
Okay, that's brilliant. That's lovely and succinct. Please confirm whether online reviews outside of advertisers' control, so there's no incentive and it's just organic feeds, fall outside of the restrictions.
I think this is one for sort of the CAP's general remit on reviews for anything. In their natural state, they're likely to be outside scope. But obviously, the ASA is going to be, is going to have to pay particular attention here, the paid for element of it. But I think in general, the natural organic review type content that someone has posted off their own bat is likely to be out.
Okay. Sorry, just quickly going through. Do the rules apply to partnerships where in-scope advertisers use partners' databases, so emails and newsletters, to market products in online media?
If someone's paying for an advertisement to be placed within the communication that's sent out, that would be likely to be within scope. We would have to see the specifics to judge it, and the ASA will do that in relation to the relevant part of Section 6 of the guidance.
Okay. Right, I think it's bang on 11 now. So I think we're going to have to wrap things up. But as I said, if you've put your name and email in the Q&A box, then I will contact you at some point to just get back to you. But we're going to have to end the webinar here now. I just want to thank all of our speakers today for presenting the information, and to thank you all for attending. As I said, I'll be sending a follow-up email with a link to the recording, the presentation, and a link to the resources that we've referenced today. And that's basically it. So enjoy the rest of your days, and I'll stop the recording now.